Mathematically speaking, Swaxe is the most cursed weapon type, and it's exclusively because of one single modifier. To find out why, we need to go back a little bit. Swaxe is a weapon that has an extra stat. Unlike something like Greatsword or Longsword that get by with attack, element and a sharpness bar, Swaxe also has a file type. Typically, these files are basically just modifiers that apply very late in the damage calculation. We fast forward a little to World and its popularity and impact on the franchise as a whole, with it being this much more popular than all previous entries. A lot of content creators, guide writers and math people rose along it. This raised both the standard and also the understanding of what's happening behind the scenes in Monster Hunter. We fast forward again to Sunbreak this time. While nothing franchise specific happened there, that's when I started making guides and publicly looking at the math. During Sunbreak's update cycle, Wiggler was formed. The goal was to have guidelines for the guides themselves to make them as user-friendly and readable, as comprehensible as possible, and get qualified feedback to continuously improve them. As such, we have a vast knowledge base on the background and inner workings of MH, and we needed tools to maintain the standard that we set for ourselves. Specifically, we needed calculators. Most of us agree that EFR is a tool that is useful if in the right hands, but it is very abstract for someone that is not intimately familiar with how damage works and what it means. It's a great tool for comparing sets of the same weapon type and preferably of the same weapon, but it's very bad at telling the whole story. So the idea was to switch from that to something more measurable, to something that someone with less understanding and experience could make sense of. And so the damage calculator sheets were born. Just building them is naturally not enough. What good is a calculator if it basically outputs random numbers, right? So they need to be verified. Now, my stance on those calculators is that for me and my purposes, which is broader guides and sets for a more casual audience, good enough is good enough. The typical full release loop will deal in the realm of 1600 to 2200 damage depending on set and target hit zone value. So if I'm off by 1%, that doesn't really shake anything, considering that I tend to prefer the metric of combos to kill, the smallest number, the easiest to understand. Enter Wilds. Early on in the first open beta, we learned that the barrel hit zone is 80. So we could test the motion values. We could test weapon-specific modifiers, like file types. The only file type in the beta was the power file. Historically, that is a post modifier, which means it applies late and scales with everything else on your set. That also affects raw. In Wilds, however, we figured out that it is not a post modifier, but a base modifier. To many other very knowledgeable people, that was understood to be a nerf. To me, as the Swaxe person in this team, it meant a fundamental change to the damage formula. Eventually, Wilds came, and within just a couple days, I had my Swaxe damage calc ready to go, ready for verification. That essentially just means inputting a set and a weapon, and then checking if the damage that it calculates is equivalent to what's actually happening in-game. For raw, in pretty much every instance, it was accurate within rounding error, well below the 1% I would be okay with. I have the privilege of having a lot of experience with Swaxe and its inner workings. So from just the weapon stats and the motion values, it was very clear to me that element will not have a place in this type of meta. I tested the calc with a weak element file, specifically the WinThunderAxe 1. I'm not going to rehash the damage formula here, there is a whole video on that. In this clip, I have the power charm for 6 attack and a food buff for 2 attack for a total of 148 raw and 12 ice. Remember that element is always bloated in wilds because reasons. We know the motion value and element of overhead slash and file ticks. We know the hit zone value and elemental hit zone value of the dummy. We know the modifier for green sharpness, so we can plot all of that into the formula, and we arrive at the conclusion that this attack should deal 59.5 damage. And it does. The file tick should deal 20.1 damage, and it also does. What this tells me is that the formula is fundamentally correct. This is an ice elemental Archon weapon. 215 attack and 34 ice. We calculate overhead slash to deal 117.7 damage and the file tick to deal 45.3. This is the same Archon but with ice attack 3. We calculate overhead to be 122.1 and the file tick to be 50.8. Now, any reasonable person would look at this and ask, well, where's the problem? You can probably tell that there's rounding going on here. And if you look at the unrounded results of this, it seems weird. At the time, I chalked this up to a rounding error. Some tests had a difference of up to 1 damage, which again, in the grand scheme of things, is negligible. But it was there. Shortly after that, I wrote the first version of the Swaxe Math guide. This was up for review and eventually found its way to Reddit. This also led to me getting in touch with Kookaburra. And as you do as math nerds, you exchange spreadsheets. And I noticed that his sheet did not have issues in the same instances as mine did. It was correct for the higher end, I should say, but was wrong at the low end. And we used pretty much the same formula, which was weird. But again, good enough is good enough. So despite the nagging feeling, I just left it be. A couple months ago, Pilgrim more or less announced that he is working on a project that I'm excited and hopeful to one day be allowed and able to share, and that he's going to require the help of other knowledgeable weapon folk. Unlike mine, his project requires accuracy. A couple weeks ago, right after the I quote-unquote like wilds video I made, he approached me finding the same weirdness in the Swaxe damage calculation. And considering that no one I know of actually went and dug into it, I did. To showcase what exactly is weird, let's look at the Lagiacrus Swaxe. Here I have 228 attack and 32 thunder. 30 from base and 2 from convert thunder resistance. Overhead slash should deal 119.3 and it does. With the same formula, file tick should deal 37.6. But it doesn't. This is the same Lagiacrus Swaxe, but with thunder attack 3. We still have 5 thunder res from the meal bonus and calculated to deal 123.5 damage on the overhead slash, which it does, and 39.1 on the file tick, which it does not. So, what's happening here? I sat down and tested. I did a bunch of element setups of varying amounts of element and just recorded the numbers. Then I ran all those setups to see what they should be doing if the formula we had was correct. Those differences all seemed a little bit too random to actually be random. So let's strategically go through what could be happening here. We know the motion value is correct because otherwise the other damages would have broken. We know the same for element. We know that the files apply in the correct place in the formula for that very same reason. We know that sharpness is correct from a bunch of other tests. We know that percent element values are correct. So that leaves only one place, flat element. And upon further testing and more mathing, it turns out that there is a modifier that applies to flat element. There is no concise or easy way to explain this. The modifier applies during unbridled and full release file ticks for power, element and dragon files, and it applies during file ticks for power and dragon files. Power and dragon share the same modifier and element is standalone. That modifier for element is 1.25 and for power and dragons it is 2.85. What does that mean? Well, if you have plus 10 element and you use an element file, during those moves it is counted as 12.5 element. If you use a power file or dragon file for some reason, it is counted as 28.5. Critical Boost is widely considered an absurdly powerful, if not outright broken skill, and it raises your critical modifier from 1.25 to up to 1.4. That is a 0.15 increase. This modifier for power files, which are the preferred file type, is a 185% boost to flat element only. But wait, there's more. Wilds, much like Rise and World, has a cap to how much additional element a weapon can gain. This modifier ignores that. It is not untypical for the Lagiacrus Swaxe to gain 20 element from just Thunder Res and Burst. With its 30 base element, an unoptimized set during damage calculation of these attacks has 87 Thunder element, which is ridiculous. Before you're gonna flood the comment section below this, if that now means that element is good, it does not. The recent Swaxe Math video had that included. It is still not good. Actually, now that I think about it, comments are good for the algorithm, so go ahead and leave one anyway, wink emoji. And I can say that with confidence, because after I figured out what that modifier was and how exactly it works, I went and calculated all power files that had an element that didn't have outright dogshit stats. Laggy is still the only relevant one. And I mean technically so, but for different reason. What follows is my opinion. What this modifier means to me, and probably to a lot of other very baffled math folk, you really can't trust shit anymore. You can't rely on your experience and everything needs double and triple checking. It is absurd and insane to me that this exists. When I say that I dislike wilds, I hear a lot of different opinions on why that may or may not be the case. Could be the performance, it could be that it's too easy, that it's too hard, that I'm tired of Monster Hunter. No. It's stuff like this. Someone has to have gone through the enormous omni damage formula and manually added these values. It is way too consistent to be unintentional, unless the game is so broken that it pulls these values consistently from somewhere, and I doubt that. I am convinced it is intentional. And to have that someone edit this modifier in, program specifically for it, instead of fixing any of the other dozens upon dozens of problems Wild has, is telling to me. But that leaves us with the question why it is there in the first place. Why is there this 2.85 or 1.25 modifier? Granted, this is speculation, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's there specifically to mess with people like, well, me. If you actually read the end user license agreement to Wilds, you don't own the game, by the way. Capcom seems very against the idea of people reverse engineering the stuff in their game. And to some degree, that probably also applies to the damage formula. Given the often questionable descriptions of certain skills, I'm convinced this only exists to obfuscate what is happening under the hood. Which, again, I think there is dozens other problems that could really need the attention first. But that's just my opinion. At this point, I'd like to thank Pilgrim for prodding me into looking deeper. And I'd like to thank everyone that endured my rants about this modifier, which I lovingly call the fucking modifier, because why the fuck is it here? And I must say, the more I do this YouTube thing here, the more I admire other creators. This is the first unscripted video that I've ever done. It fucking sucked. I'll probably not do it again in the future.